25 centuries ago, a philosopher gazed into the soul of man and saw with terrifying clarity the patterns that would lead to our contemporary civilizational crisis. Aristotle's analysis of political decay wasn't merely historical observation, it was prophetic insight into the spiritual disorder that inevitably manifests when human consciousness loses its proper orientation toward transcendent truth. What we witness today in our fragmenting institutions, our ideological fanaticism, our reduction of human existence to material calculations, all of this Aristotle foresaw in his examination of how constitutions corrupt when the soul itself becomes disordered. The philosopher who taught us that man is a political animal also revealed how man becomes a destructive force when he loses touch with the divine ground of his existence. Through decades of investigating the crisis of modernity, I have come to understand that Aristotle's political philosophy contains a diagnosis more penetrating than any contemporary analysis. He saw that political disorder always reflects disorder in consciousness itself, that when we abandon contemplation of eternal truth for the pursuit of finite goods, we set in motion forces that must culminate in civilizational breakdown. Today's crisis was not an accident of history. It was the inevitable consequence of abandoning the philosophical vision that Aristotle articulated with unmatched precision. To understand our predicament, we must return to this giant of human wisdom. Chapter 1: The corruption of constitutional order. Aristotle understood what modern political science has forgotten, that constitutions are not mere legal documents but expressions of the soul's orientation toward reality. In the Politics, he revealed how every form of government reflects a particular type of human character, and how constitutional corruption follows inexorably from the corruption of that character. Consider his analysis of democracy's transformation into ochlocracy, mob rule. Aristotle saw that democratic institutions could not preserve themselves once citizens began to view freedom as license rather than the capacity for virtue. When democratic man loses the habit of contemplating what is truly good and instead pursues only what appears immediately pleasant, democratic institutions become instruments of passion rather than reason. This is precisely what we observe in contemporary American politics. Our constitutional order, designed by men who understood Aristotelian wisdom about mixed government and the separation of powers, now operates as a mechanism for satisfying the desires of competing interest groups rather than pursuing the common good. The transformation Aristotle predicted has occurred, democratic citizenship has degenerated into consumer choice, and constitutional governance has become mere procedural manipulation. Aristotle's insight into tyranny proves equally prophetic. He saw that tyranny emerges not only through violent seizure of power but through the gradual corruption of constitutional norms by those who promise to fulfill the immediate desires of the masses. The tyrant succeeds by convincing citizens that constitutional restraints are obstacles to their happiness rather than protections of their deepest human needs. Modern ideological movements exhibit precisely this pattern. They promise to overcome constitutional limitations in order to achieve perfect justice, perfect equality, or perfect security. They present traditional constitutional order as an impediment to human flourishing rather than its necessary foundation. In doing so, they recapitulate the ancient pattern Aristotle analyzed with such devastating clarity. The philosopher saw that constitutional corruption accelerates when citizens lose the capacity to distinguish between ruling and being ruled according to merit versus ruling and being ruled according to force or manipulation. This distinction requires practical wisdom, phronesis, which can only develop through contemplative engagement with eternal standards of justice. When contemplation disappears from public life, politics becomes mere power struggle disguised as principled debate. Chapter 2: The Loss of Contemplative Vision. At the heart of Aristotle's political philosophy lies a recognition that modern thought has systematically obscured. Political order depends upon the cultivation of contemplative wisdom. In the Nicomachean Ethics and the Politics, Aristotle demonstrated that human beings achieve their highest fulfillment through theoria, the contemplation of eternal truth, and that political communities exist ultimately to make such contemplation possible. This is why Aristotle's prediction of our crisis proves so accurate. He understood that when a civilization abandons the contemplative life as its highest aim, it inevitably reduces human existence to the pursuit of lower goods, pleasure, wealth, honor, or power. These goods, being finite and competitive, can only be pursued through conflict. A society organized around their acquisition must become a society of perpetual struggle. Modern civilization has followed this trajectory with devastating precision. We have systematically dismantled the institutions that cultivated contemplative wisdom, classical education, religious traditions, philosophical schools that understood philosophy as a way of life rather than academic technique. In their place, we have erected institutions designed to maximize material production and consumption. The result is exactly what Aristotle foresaw: human beings who have lost touch with their highest capacities and therefore pursue goods that cannot satisfy their deepest longings. Contemporary political movements that promise earthly salvation through social transformation exhibit precisely the pattern Aristotle analyzed when he examined how the abandonment of contemplative wisdom leads to tyrannical attempts to construct perfect societies. Aristotle saw that contemplative wisdom provides the standard by which we judge political arrangements. When we lose this standard, politics becomes mere power struggle. Citizens can no longer distinguish between just and unjust claims because they have lost touch with the source of justice itself, the eternal order that contemplative reason apprehends. This explains why contemporary political discourse has become so fundamentally disordered. Without contemplative wisdom to provide genuine criteria for judgment, political argument reduces to the manipulation of opinion and the mobilization of passion. We witness endless debates about policy details while the fundamental questions about human nature and the purpose of political community remain unasked. Politicians appeal to immediate desires rather than permanent human needs because both they and their audiences have lost the capacity to distinguish between authentic and inauthentic goods. Chapter 3: The Science of Character Formation. Aristotle's greatest contribution to understanding our contemporary crisis lies in his recognition that political problems are fundamentally problems of character formation. The Nicomachean Ethics reveals how human excellence develops through the cultivation of virtues that align the soul with reality's eternal structure. When this process fails, political disaster follows inevitably. Take a moment to examine your own experience of moral judgment. When you recognize genuine courage, justice, or wisdom, you participate in the same apprehension of eternal standards that Aristotle analyzed. You discover that these excellences are not mere cultural conventions but reflect the structure of reality itself. This is why they produce harmony in the soul and why their absence produces disorder. Aristotle understood that character formation requires participation in communities that embody these excellences. Virtue cannot be learned through abstract instruction but must be practiced within relationships that exemplify excellent activity. This is why he emphasized the political community's role in moral education, not through propaganda or indoctrination, but through the creation of institutions that make virtuous activity possible and attractive. Modern educational theory has inverted this wisdom. We have abandoned character formation in favor of technique acquisition and information transfer. Our institutions no longer aim to cultivate souls capable of contemplating eternal truth but to produce efficient functionaries within economic and administrative systems. The university, once understood as a community of scholars pursuing wisdom, has become a credentialing mechanism for career advancement. The result is precisely what Aristotle predicted: human beings who possess technical competence but lack the moral wisdom necessary for genuine political judgment. They can manipulate material forces with unprecedented skill but cannot distinguish between authentic and inauthentic human goods. They become susceptible to ideological movements that promise to satisfy their deepest longings through social engineering. Aristotle saw that such individuals inevitably seek salvation through political action because they have lost touch with the contemplative activities that provide genuine fulfillment. Politics becomes religion, and political leaders become savior figures who promise to create earthly paradises through the reorganization of social relationships. The philosopher's analysis of moral education reveals why character cannot be formed through mass movements or programmatic reforms. Excellence develops through personal relationships with exemplars of virtue, through gradual habituation in excellent activities, and through the cultivation of practical wisdom that connects particular actions with universal principles. This process requires time, patience, and the kind of stable communities that our mobile, technological civilization systematically undermines. Chapter 4: The Eternal Return of Gnostic Politics. Aristotle's analysis of political corruption reveals patterns that transcend historical circumstances. What he observed in the decline of Greek city-states reflects permanent possibilities in human consciousness, patterns that recur whenever societies lose touch with transcendent truth. This is why his insights prove so illuminating for understanding modern ideological movements. The philosopher recognized that human beings who abandon contemplative wisdom inevitably seek to recover meaning through political action. They attempt to construct perfect societies that will eliminate the tensions and limitations inherent in human existence. Aristotle saw that such attempts must fail because they misunderstand the nature of human fulfillment, but he also saw that they would recur throughout history. Consider how contemporary progressive movements recapitulate the patterns Aristotle analyzed. They promise to overcome scarcity, conflict, and suffering through social transformation. They present traditional institutions not as imperfect responses to permanent human challenges but as obstacles to human liberation that can be definitively transcended. This represents what I have called the immanentization of the escheaton, the attempt to achieve perfect fulfillment within historical time through human effort alone. This is precisely the mentality Aristotle examined when he analyzed tyrannical constitutions. The tyrant promises to satisfy desires that constitutional government necessarily frustrates, the desire for unlimited freedom, perfect equality, or absolute security. He succeeds because citizens have lost the wisdom necessary to recognize that these desires reflect misunderstandings of human nature. Aristotle understood that such movements gain power by exploiting the spiritual emptiness that results from abandoning contemplative life. People who have lost touch with eternal truth become susceptible to promises of earthly salvation because they retain the religious impulse but lack proper religious objects. They seek through political transformation what can only be achieved through personal transformation guided by transcendent truth. Modern secular ideologies exhibit this pattern with remarkable consistency. They promise to achieve through political action what religious traditions recognized as possible only through divine grace and personal transformation. Whether the ideology is Marxist, fascist, or contemporary progressivism, the structure remains identical: the identification of historical enemies whose elimination will produce perfect human fulfillment. Aristotle's political science provides the analytical framework necessary to understand why such movements must produce tyranny rather than liberation. They misidentify the source of human dissatisfaction and therefore apply remedies that exacerbate rather than heal the spiritual disorders they claim to address. By promising impossible earthly paradises, they justify unlimited political power and the destruction of traditional restraints on government authority. Chapter 5: The Reality of Natural Law. Aristotle's prophetic accuracy regarding our civilizational crisis stems from his discovery of natural law, the recognition that reality itself possesses a structure that provides standards for human judgment and action. Modern thought has attempted to escape this insight, but our contemporary disorders prove its permanent validity. When you experience genuine moral obligation, the recognition that certain actions are truly required regardless of personal preference or social convention, you encounter the same reality Aristotle analyzed. You discover that human reason participates in an eternal order that transcends individual will and cultural variation. This participation provides the foundation for authentic political judgment. Aristotle understood that natural law operates not as external constraint but as the structure within which human flourishing becomes possible. Just as physical health requires conformity to bodily nature, spiritual and political health require conformity to the order that reason apprehends. Violation of this order produces disorder in individuals, communities, and civilizations. This is why societies that systematically violate natural law principles eventually collapse, regardless of their technological sophistication or military power. Modern legal and political theory has attempted to construct human institutions without reference to natural law. We have embraced legal positivism, which treats law as mere human convention, and political contractualism, which derives political authority from human agreement alone. These approaches seem to promise greater human freedom by eliminating transcendent constraints on human will. The result has been exactly what Aristotle predicted: the collapse of genuine legal and political authority. When law becomes mere human preference backed by force, citizens lose the capacity to distinguish between legitimate and illegitimate commands. When political authority derives only from human consent, it becomes vulnerable to manipulation by those skilled in manufacturing consent through propaganda and mass manipulation techniques. Contemporary constitutional crises reflect this deeper philosophical confusion. We have lost the natural law foundation that made constitutional government possible while retaining constitutional forms that can no longer command genuine respect. The result is increasing reliance on administrative manipulation and judicial legislation rather than genuine political deliberation. Aristotle saw that natural law provides the only adequate foundation for political judgment because it connects human reason with eternal truth. This connection enables citizens to evaluate political claims according to objective standards rather than subjective preferences or group loyalties. Recovery of this insight offers the only path beyond our current disorders toward authentic political community. Chapter 6: The Recovery of Classical Wisdom. Aristotle's enduring relevance lies not in nostalgic return to ancient forms but in recovery of permanent insights about human nature and political order. His philosophical investigations revealed structures of consciousness and reality that transcend historical circumstances. Understanding these structures provides the foundation for authentic spiritual and political resistance to contemporary disorder. The process of recovery begins with anamnesis, the philosophical recollection of fundamental experiences that modern consciousness has forgotten. When we seriously engage Aristotle's analyses of virtue, contemplation, and political order, we rediscover capacities within ourselves that technological civilization has obscured but cannot destroy. This is not archaeological reconstruction but living participation in eternal truth that remains permanently accessible to properly oriented consciousness. Consider Aristotle's understanding of practical wisdom, phronesis. This involves the ability to perceive particular situations in light of universal principles, to act appropriately within concrete circumstances while maintaining orientation toward eternal truth. Such wisdom cannot be reduced to technical expertise or emotional response but requires the integration of contemplative insight with practical experience. It enables the recognition of genuine human goods amid the confusion of competing claims and ideological manipulations. Modern education has systematically eliminated the cultivation of practical wisdom in favor of specialized training and ideological indoctrination. We produce individuals who can manipulate material forces with unprecedented skill but cannot make sound judgments about fundamental human goods. They become prey to movements that promise simple solutions to complex spiritual problems because they lack the wisdom necessary to distinguish between authentic and counterfeit goods. Recovery of Aristotelian wisdom requires rebuilding institutions that cultivate contemplative capacity alongside practical competence. This means creating educational communities that understand learning as character formation rather than information transfer, political associations that pursue genuine common goods rather than factional advantage, and cultural institutions that preserve and transmit the wisdom of classical and religious traditions. Such recovery cannot be achieved through mass movements or political programs but only through the patient work of individuals and small communities committed to living according to discovered truth rather than manufactured opinion. Aristotle understood that authentic political order grows from the bottom up through the cultivation of excellent souls rather than from the top down through institutional manipulation. The philosopher's vision of the contemplative life provides both critique of contemporary disorders and positive model for their transcendence. Those who cultivate contemplative wisdom become capable of genuine political judgment precisely because they are not enslaved to political passion. They can participate in political life without being consumed by it, contributing to the common good while maintaining primary orientation toward eternal truth. This creates what I have called islands of order, communities of excellence that preserve authentic human possibilities even when broader civilization succumbs to disorder. Chapter 7: Living the Philosophical Life in Dark Times. Aristotle's ultimate response to political crisis was not political action but the cultivation of philosophical wisdom that transcends political circumstances while remaining engaged with political reality. His understanding of the contemplative life offers a model for authentic existence that neither retreats from worldly responsibility nor becomes consumed by worldly ambition. The philosopher recognized that in times of widespread political corruption, the wise person must maintain what I have called islands of order, small communities of excellence that preserve authentic human possibilities even when broader civilization succumbs to disorder. These islands provide both refuge from corruption and seed beds for eventual renewal. They demonstrate that human excellence remains possible regardless of external circumstances. This is not escapism but the deepest form of political responsibility. By cultivating genuine human excellence within limited circumstances, such communities maintain the possibility of authentic political order even when broader institutions fail. They preserve the wisdom necessary for civilizational recovery while avoiding the futile attempt to reform corrupt institutions through direct political action that only perpetuates the disorder it seeks to remedy. Aristotle's own life exemplified this approach. He remained engaged with political affairs, tutoring Alexander, analyzing constitutions, participating in civic life, while maintaining primary commitment to philosophical investigation that transcended political circumstances. He understood that the philosopher's greatest political contribution lies in preserving and developing the wisdom that makes genuine political order possible. For contemporary readers, this means recognizing that resistance to civilizational disorder must begin with personal transformation guided by recovered classical wisdom. We cannot restore authentic political order while remaining spiritually disordered ourselves. The path forward requires what Aristotle called purification, the gradual alignment of soul with reality's eternal structure through contemplative practice and virtuous action. Such purification enables us to see through the ideological fantasies that dominate contemporary consciousness while maintaining hope grounded in experienced truth rather than wishful thinking. We discover that reality's eternal structure provides resources for human flourishing that no historical circumstances can permanently destroy. This is why totalitarian regimes, despite their apparent power, ultimately fail when confronted with souls that have maintained contact with transcendent truth. The philosophical life thus becomes both personal salvation and civilizational responsibility, a way of existing that honors human dignity while preparing for opportunities to restore authentic political order when historical circumstances permit. Those who maintain contemplative wisdom during dark times become the seed of eventual renewal, capable of recognizing and seizing opportunities for authentic reconstruction when they arise. Aristotle understood that such opportunities cannot be manufactured through human effort but emerge through the mysterious workings of what he called divine providence operating through human freedom properly oriented toward eternal truth. Conclusion: Aristotle's prophetic vision of our contemporary crisis reveals the permanent structure underlying all civilizational breakdown, the abandonment of contemplative wisdom in favor of purely practical or ideological approaches to human existence. What appears as political disorder reflects deeper spiritual disorder, the loss of contact with transcendent truth that alone provides adequate foundation for human community. Yet Aristotle's diagnosis contains implicit hope. The same rational capacity that enables us to recognize our disorder provides access to the eternal standards by which authentic order becomes possible. The contemplative life remains open to those willing to undertake the philosophical discipline necessary for its recovery. This is why no historical circumstances can permanently destroy the possibility of human excellence. Our task is neither political revolution nor resigned withdrawal but the patient cultivation of wisdom that transcends historical circumstances while remaining deeply engaged with historical responsibility. Through such cultivation, we participate in the eternal order that no temporal disorder can ultimately destroy. We become living demonstrations that authentic human existence remains possible regardless of external conditions. In times of civilizational crisis, philosophy becomes the most practical activity possible, not because it offers immediate solutions to political problems but because it maintains access to the truth that makes genuine solutions possible. Aristotle's enduring gift is the recognition that this truth remains permanently available to consciousness properly oriented toward reality. The path forward requires courage to think through fundamental questions rather than accepting manufactured answers, commitment to excellence rather than mere success, and faith that reality's eternal structure supports rather than frustrates authentic human flourishing.